Hi, my name is Reverend Dale Brown, and I have the great privilege of being the pastor of Community Church at Ocean Pines. Twice a month we do a podcast. Today we have a very special podcast, and it is done by Ken Waters. Ken is a member here at Community Church, and he is a great fan of Jimmy Stewart as an actor, but also as pertains to his time in military service. And Ken will also describe for you today the faith that Jimmy Stewart had that gave his life meaning and purpose. Now, Ken, I'll tell you this, I have profound respect for Jimmy Stewart. I love his movies. In fact, he's my favorite actor. Rear Window and all those movies. But my ultimate favorite, as we did the series of sermons in Advent, is It's a Wonderful Life. But one of the great things about Jimmy Stewart that I admire is that he was a dog lover. He and his wife owned 2 dogs. And one of the great poems that I can never keep a dry eye for is A Dog Named Bo that Jimmy Stewart read on the Johnny Carson show many, many years ago. So I invite you to enjoy time with our guest host, Mr. Ken Waters. He's a great guy. He told me to say that. And yet it's true. And his wife Nancy is a lovely person. And they're great friends and a great part of this church. And so it is my privilege to introduce to you and to welcome to this podcast, Mr. Ken Waters. Ken, welcome.
Good morning. As the pastor said, I'm a real fan of Jimmy Stewart. As an actor, as a military man, and as a Christian. So I'm going to tell you a little about Jimmy Stewart as relates to the wonderful Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life. You may know Jimmy Stewart as the ungrateful turned humble George Bailey, but faith in Jesus drove the man behind the character. Though most people recognize Jimmy Stewart as an actor, he also served in the military during World War II. In an article for Guidepost, the now deceased actor shared about how his father encouraged him through a note passed to him before he shipped out. Stewart wrote, "That night, alone in my bunk, I opened it and read, 'My dear Jim, soon after you read this letter, you will be on your way to the worst sort of danger. I have had this in mind for a long time, and I am very concerned. But Jim, I am banking on the enclosed copy of the 91st Psalm. The thing that takes place of fear and worry is the promise in these words. I am staking my faith in these words. I feel sure that God will lead you through this mad experience. I can say no more. I only continue to pray. God bless you and keep you. I love you more than I can tell you, Dad.'" Never before had he said he loved me. I always knew he did, but he never had said it until now. I wept. In the envelope, there was also a small booklet bearing the title, The Secret Place, A Key to the 91st Psalm. I began to read it. From that day, the little booklet was always with me. Before every bombing raid over Europe, I read some of it, and with each reading, the meaning deepened for me. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress. His truth shall be my shield and buckler. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day. For he shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways. They shall bear thee up in their hands, lest thou dash thy foot against a stone. And I was borne up. Dad had committed me to God, but I felt the presence of both throughout the war. Many people suspect that Stewart suffered from undiagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder after the war. Ned Fortney, author of Saluting America's Veterans, wrote, "Determined to lead by example, he bucked the system, assigning himself to every combat mission he could. By the end of the war, he was one of the most respected and decorated pilots in his unit. But his wartime service came at a high personal price. In the final months of World War II, he was grounded for being flat cappy, today called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. When he returned to the U.S. in August 1945, Stewart was a changed man. He had lost so much weight that he looked sickly. He rarely slept, and when he did, he had nightmares of planes exploding and men falling through the air screaming. In one mission alone, he had lost 13 planes and 130 men, most of whom he knew personally. He was depressed, couldn't focus, and refused to talk to anyone about his war experiences. His acting career was all but over. As one of Stewart's biographers put it, every decision he made during the war was going to preserve life or cost lives. He took back to Hollywood all the stress that he had built up. That's when Stewart was cast in one of today's most popular Christmas movies, It's a Wonderful Life. Major Danny Surgenson reports a similar story. Then the famed director Frank Capra, himself recently home from the war, offered Stewart the role of George Bailey in his new movie. Stewart initially balked. He hadn't wanted to do a drama, having stated that he preferred his first post-war film be a comedy, much less a story that featured a suicidal protagonist. But when Capra reminded him that he had no other offers or options, Stewart acquiesced. The result was one of the most iconic films of all time and a Christmas staple. By the standards of the day, It's a Wonderful Life was a long, expensive, and tortured shoot, with Stewart channeling all his rage, trauma, sadness, darkness. He became George Bailey, and audiences were transfixed. As Stewart's biographer, Robert Matson, said, "I don't think he had that kind of capacity before the war. It enabled him to be ferocious and to have that raw emotion. In a very real sense, the role provided Stewart with on-screen therapy, prolonged exposure treatment before such a term existed." Stewart himself recounted the experience on It's a Wonderful Life for another Guidepost article. Stewart said, "In one scene, for example, George Bailey is faced with unjust criminal charges and, not knowing where to turn, ends up in a little roadside restaurant. He is unaware that most of the people in town are arduously praying for him. In this scene, at the lowest point in George Bailey's life, Frank Capra was shooting a long shot of me slumped in despair. In agony, I raise my eyes and follow the script. Plead, God, God, dear Father in heaven, I'm not a praying man, but if you're up there and you can hear me, show me the way. I'm at the end of my rope. Show me the way, God." As I said these words, I felt the loneliness, the hopelessness of people who had nowhere to turn, and my eyes filled with tears. I broke down sobbing. This was not planned at all, but the power of that prayer, the realization that our Father in heaven is there to help the hopeless, had reduced me to tears. Stewart didn't know the movie would be such a success when he took the role. Instead, he depended on his personal faith in Christ and let it shine through the role. George Bailey's Divine Salvation is a tale of healing faith for a simple reason. It's simply about an ordinary man who discovers that living each ordinary day honorably with faith in God and a selfless concern for others can make for a truly wonderful life, Stewart said, and for that we can thank Stewart for demonstrating Christ in both word and deed.